Chapter 22, Productive Property, Economics Part 7. Despite the terrible consequences of our advertisement-fueled economy of desire, the law against covetousness, as well as the command against stealing, actually have an enormous positive impact on the theory of economics, as they create and help define the category of private property. Private property is the basis of true ownership. Footnote. Technically speaking, everything is owned by God, but he allows us permanent stewardship over the things referred to here. It's still a family affair, as we are children owned by him. End footnote. And it's an essential foundation to building a lasting civilization. There are some things that a person can hold in their care, and they cannot be compelled to sell or exchange them under any circumstances. Like other principles derived from the Bible, there are symbolic elements that need to be translated forward to our own day to fully understand. Here we are given the representations, and we need to unpack the symbolic function. We will take our categories from the 10th commandment and see how far it helps us in understanding the impact of private property and its economic impact. Functional representation, wife. Symbolic function, spouse. Functional representation, house. Symbolic function, material shelter and privacy. Functional representation, field. Symbolic function, productive property. Functional representation, male and female servant. Symbolic function, mutually beneficial relationships. Functional representation, ox. Symbolic function, productive animals and equipment. Functional representation, donkey. Symbolic function, transportation. Functional representation, anything that is yours. Symbolic function, personal possessions, pets, miscellaneous. These categories are in some ways oddly specific to a more agrarian society, but the commandment also contains a catch-all phrase that would include anything that someone can typically own. There are some differences as well. As these laws were first given at the beginning of the Exodus, there was only mention of a house, for which most families meant a tent. When the 10 Commandments are reiterated as they prepare to enter the promised land of Israel, we also have a category for a field. But this is not necessarily an indication that land is a type of private property. The reason land isn't a category is because the Bible has very particular rules about the possession of land. It all belongs to God, and he divides it to be stewarded by various nations. The land of Israel is divided among tribes, clans, and families, and these portions are considered ancestral property. The people can sell or lease out their fields, but every 50 years, ownership reverts back to the original family. Owner's privileges and squatter's rights. The ability to own land and what a person can do with it is a complicated subject. It varies from state to state, both in what a person can do with their land and in the types of taxation they will be subject to. As time has gone on and governmental and bureaucratic power has increased, the rights and benefits of property owners have decreased. Things like mineral rights and airspace have been separated from the land itself. Zoning laws and rules about development, inheritance and tax codes have made the benefits of land ownership much more complicated. Footnote. An interesting case for further research in this topic is the tax codes of country clubs in California. Several wealthy institutions have lobbied to change or keep laws that benefit these massively wealthy institutions. These large plots of extremely valuable land in places like Beverly Hills are taxed as agricultural land, the lowest category. Property laws in California are such that property tax is fixed at the appraised value of a home at the time of purchase as long as the owner lives there. This protects elderly people on fixed incomes from inflation and rising prices. When the owner passes away, inheritance laws call for land value to be reassessed when the property is inherited. However, country clubs' perpetual membership rolls count as a continuous ownership, And so, despite the massive income derived from their land, many of them pay taxes at the same rate as farmland appraised in the 1950s. End footnote. While it is still usually preferable to own property than to lease it, the notion of permanent ownership has long passed. The rights and power are in the hands of those who own the most land, influence, and resources. Chief among these are the federal and state governments, then large corporations and wealthy families and individuals. For anyone able to claim a small plot of land, they need to defend their right to stay there from barbarians and thieves, not with weapons, but with paperwork and lawsuits. In this day of lawfare and constant regulatory attrition, combined with the nebulous process of procuring good credit and loans, the information needed to wisely purchase and maintain property has become difficult to obtain. It's no wonder that so many young adults continue living in their parents' households far longer than previous generations. The path to adulthood has become a wilderness overgrown with endless paperwork and sticky red tape. The unfortunate truth for most people just trying to find a place to pitch their tent in the wilderness is that most of the land and homes are already owned and spoken for. The good news is that at least some semblance of charity towards the stranger is woven into the fabric of our society. The Founding Fathers drew much inspiration for the laws of the United States from their knowledge of the Bible, and there is a noticeable similarity between elements of the Constitution and many of the Mosaic laws of ancient Israel. One of these is the idea that there are limits to what it means to own land. Though laws vary from state to state, the owners of private property do not have absolute control over everything that happens on their land. As an example, while someone may post private property signs warning trespassers, a landowner who kills someone crossing through his property is still subject to the due process of law and may be convicted of a crime. The more common injustices around private property are the tendencies toward covetousness that can cause those who have much to acquire more, to sit on land that could be used productively, and manipulate prices through collusion. The government has often been guilty of believing that they are an owner of the land and not a steward. Local governments can cause crises through zoning laws, as in many cities that disallow the construction of additions and secondary structures on existing homes, multifamily homes, and other creative solutions that would allow housing costs to fall, essentially creating elitist communities that exclude poorer people through such laws. At the other end of the extremes are squatters' rights. These are laws designed to protect people who fall into unfortunate situations. If someone loses their job and is unable to make a rent or mortgage payment, they may be protected from forcible eviction. Some of these laws can actually result in a transfer of ownership if someone moves into an abandoned home or improves a property on their own. However, these laws are also subject to manipulation and abuse. The more lenient they are, the more likely people are to abuse them. In some cities, a person may pay an initial deposit on an apartment and never pay again. The process of eviction can take months for the landlord, who still needs to pay taxes and mortgage payments on the building that is not earning him any income. This drives up the cost of insurance and other things that make obtaining houses more difficult for the people who are actually willing to pay. It may be a tempting thought to take advantage of these laws. Unfortunately, this leaves us dependent on a system of corruption. When the cost of bringing positive, lasting change impacts our immediate comfort and security, we will lack the will to move on. As Paul wrote, all who rely on works of the law are under a curse, for it is written, "Cursed be everyone who does not abide by all things written in the book of the law and do them." Galatians 3:10. This applies not only to the law of Moses, but all laws. When we choose to accept one law, we accept the system that upholds it. For those who are able to find opportunities that work, there are still substantial benefits to owning homes and land. The main benefit in our current economy is a store of inflation-resistant value. Unless people are unlucky enough to buy their first home during an economic bubble, consistently making payments on that sole purchase usually means they will be able to have housing for the rest of their life, as future sales are always higher than the initial purchase price. However, a house only provides ownership of one category of needs, mainly shelter and privacy. The field belongs to another category, productive property. A field was and is a means of producing food. Not everyone needs to be a farmer. In ancient times, as in our own, farms were often able to produce far more food than what was needed by the family who worked the land. That excess was traded for other items or sold for currency, which could be spent anywhere. This allows others to focus their time and attention on producing different goods and services. But even if these other professions didn't own a field, they usually owned some kind of productive property. Productive property. I am once again indebted to C.R. Wiley's book, Man of the House, for helping me think in such terms. He gives a much more thorough explanation of the topic, and if the ideas presented here are helpful, his book should definitely be read next. Productive property could be a business, which may or may not include a building, tools, and other kinds of investments. A house could become productive property if it includes a home office, a workshop, or a garden that offsets food costs. Even something as simple as a hammer and a saw is productive property if it's used to make money or allow you to do things you would otherwise pay someone else for. When Adam and Eve were exiled out into the wilderness, they had little more than the clothes on their backs. The same may be the case for many reading this book. That means that the only productive property you start with is your time, energy, and effort. But one of the truly great features of a market economy is that compensation for labor can result in the opportunity to improve one's condition. Once you own a few tools, your productive property will allow you to earn a fuller portion of the value of your work. Entrepreneurship as we think of it today wasn't so straightforward in the days of Moses, but as economies developed, it became more important during the reigns of David and Solomon. To get started, most people require some form of investment, what we refer to as seed money, a term that refers to the original form of productive property, the seed. Adam's first duty was to tend the garden, and his original wage was access to the seed-bearing fruit trees. Every meal left him with a full belly and an investment plan for the future. Each tiny seed was a reminder that the earth is designed to be fruitful and multiply. Time and attention would bring forth food, shade, and enough excess time to provide him with rest. The amount of labor required to farm increased after the fall, but God had other means of helping the man fulfill his goals. Human effort is increased through the use of tools, productive property, and the most common form of productive property discussed in the Law of Moses, livestock. The size of a herd was an indication of wealth, and it was designed to increase wealth. Not only did they provide the meat for sacrifice, but a host of other valuable products and labor. The term used to describe the proper care of livestock is animal husbandry, which points to the level of care required to get the best return from your animals. This is why David, who had shepherded his father's flocks, was so outraged when he heard the parable of the prophet Nathan. He well understood the level of care and commitment a good shepherd gave to his flock. Unfortunately, he was less cognizant that the same care was required to foster a healthy marriage. The hopeful expectation of a good yield for the time and labor invested in your herd animals is such an integral part of the complete message of the Bible. It can even be seen in the laws regarding their theft. If a man steals an ox or a sheep and kills it or sells it, he shall repay 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. If a thief is found breaking in and is struck so that he dies, there shall be no blood guilt for him. But if the sun has risen on him, there shall be blood guilt for him. He shall surely pay. If he has nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. If the stolen beast is found alive in his possession, whether it is an ox or a donkey or a sheep, he shall pay double. Exodus 22, 1-4. This system served to incentivize practices of productive increase over attempts to hoard and protect private property. If your investment was stolen and recovered, it would still produce an increase. Such laws require enforcement, but if this was done well, it would de-incentivize theft. The statement, good fences make good neighbors, really runs against the ethos of the law of Moses, as the laws of gleaning required farmers to leave the corners of their field uncut and freely accessible for the hungry. For those who were truly hungry, the temptation to steal livestock would be mitigated by the ready access to this grain. Since the penalty for stealing without the ability to pay back the owner would result in their own servitude, it was far better to simply offer your services freely in exchange for hospitality. The overall principle is to trust in God and to work for increase, instead of working against fear of loss. It rewarded frugality, but penalized stinginess. This is the same principle behind every rags to riches story, a continual reinvestment into the labor of survival. By counting the costs and foregoing immediate pleasures for the future success, investing in productive property accelerates the progress of goals beyond the entropy of nature. Everything we see in our civilized world is a product of people who continue to work and invest after their immediate needs have been met. Those who invest wisely can quickly find themselves in a position of exponential growth when they make more by paying others to do what they used to do themselves. This creates the necessary conditions to repair the fabric of our society. It may begin by investing your excess to meet the physical needs of a stranger, but that stranger can become a productive employee. If you are willing to invest time, they can become an apprentice that will learn to do the more valuable tasks of a skilled journeyman and master. If you are willing to invest attention and emotion, they can become a trusted friend. This is the path to building community that lasts. The true purpose of debt. Many conservative voices have made a fair critique of our debt-based economy. The normalcy of being burdened with student loans, car payments, and mortgages has created a de facto system of wage slavery. But there was an aspect of positivity that was introduced with this system. As the Industrial Revolution had pulled men away from farms and into cities, competition for work could become cutthroat. Other men were competitors, not allies, and this meant that there was a lack of support structures. There was no recourse for things like injuries and no long-term stability. The introduction of employer financing for things like cars gave men an assurance of their future place. It was a sign of trust between the employer and the employee. While previously hard assets were needed to secure loans, the introduction of a credit-based system for employees meant that a reliable work history and current employment had a societal worth. This encouraged people to work diligently and to plant roots in a community where they could rely on steady employment. Our debt system has changed over the last century. The introduction of insurance and the commoditization of debt has transformed the industry from a trust-based system to one of risk management. There is no love lost between lenders and borrowers in our current day, as it is the borrowers who now shoulder virtually all the risk. Creditors can make as much or sometimes more off people who default on their loans as they once did from responsible borrowers. People who can work through programs like Dave Ramsey's to live debt-free are extremely fortunate, but this is an individualized blessing for those who can achieve it, and those in the process of paying off their debts often have little to spare for the needs of a neighbor. Debt is a bond between two parties. It ties them together. When the scales are uneven, this can be a terrible burden. As Solomon points out, the rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is the slave of the lender. Proverbs 22:7. And also, my son, do not make yourself responsible for the debts of others. Do not make such deals with friends or strangers. If you do, your words will trap you. You will be under the power of other people, so you must go and free yourself. Beg them to free you from that debt. Don't wait to rest or sleep. Escape from that trap like a deer running from a hunter. Free yourself like a bird flying from a trap. Proverbs 6, 1 through 5. Yet Solomon had a funny way of giving out advice that he didn't always follow. The wisest man in the world could calculate when a risky investment was worth the potential payout. Sometimes it pays to tie yourself to the people around you. The story of the Gibeonite deception in Joshua 9 is a good example of two parties making the best out of a tough situation. Joshua and the other leaders failed to do their due diligence and believed the story told by the Gibeonites that they had come from a long way off. When the deception was discovered, the Gibeonites were forced into a position of unskilled labor. Overall, the Gibeonites decided it was better to be in debt to the Israelites than to be eliminated by them. It's important to remember that the underpinning of all economic systems is faith. The shifting focus from optimistic hope to an emphasis on certainty and risk aversion is a sign that our institutional system is in trouble. While we may not always be in the position to lend to others financially, we should exercise faith towards those around us in helping and our willingness to ask for help. Jesus spoke most directly towards those who were in the position to do good towards others from their own excess. A bank may refuse to give you money, or they may offer you a predatory loan as a means of capturing your assets. It would be foolish to consider such lenders to be our friends. But if the shoe were on the other foot, would we act any differently? Are we noticing the small opportunities to create a better culture of lending? If you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to get back the same amount. But love your enemies and do good, and lend expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, for he is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. Be merciful, even as your Father is merciful. Luke 6, 34 through 36. The overall direction of generosity here echoes the principles set forward in the law of Moses, but takes it a step farther. The grain in the corners of the field is already there for those who are truly in need. But what if we stretch our own comfort to help those who could really use a boost? What if our small gift becomes the seed that grows into a new tree of life? Ultimately, the words of Jesus provide an opportunity to place our trust in the highest collateral available, the character of God himself. We could insist on a modest rate of interest, or hold onto our neighbor's cloak until his debt is repaid. Or we can trust that God is the one who is responsible for seeing justice done. It wasn't the Israelites who upheld their end of the bargain with the Gibeonites, as faithless King Saul tried to eliminate them, but God, who takes away crowns and thrones from the unjust and gives them to the righteous. When we release others from their own debt towards us, we may start to notice how many unearned blessings we have received. Redeeming the old gods. In conclusion, it is important to remember that once we disentangle the tangled ball of yarn that was wrapped up in words like Venus and Mars, several good things remain before us. The planets are still there to tell us signs and seasons, and our study of their movements can help us understand and make predictions about the universe we live in. The virtues associated with the gods are still there: strength, beauty, wisdom, and nobility. The areas of their governance are still a part of our world: hearth and home, grain of the field, and the fruit of the vine, mountains and rivers, ocean and sky. Even the forge of Hephaestus, the study of technology, and the messages and media heralds of Hermes are not to be feared once the spirit of the empire has been removed. Even the scandalous stories of the personified gods have something of value to contribute to our world, as a standard to help us see when our culture is getting out of hand. By dismantling the sacred system that elevated these spirits at the expense of humans, we can redeem the elements of culture left behind. This notion is unpopular with many people, especially in regard to technology. This will be discussed later on, but it's worthwhile to sit up and notice just how many things we take for granted that would have made our grandparents suspicious. New devices always seem to host new demons, but what Silicon Valley intends for evil, God can always use for good. Each year, millions of people visit the ruins of Corinth, Athens, Rome, and Ephesus. You can stand in the same amphitheater where the silversmiths chanted for hours about the greatness of Artemis, but no one worships Artemis anymore. The reason we know about the jealousy of Demetrius is because of the Apostle Paul and Luke the physician. The builders of temples and the crafters of silver shrines have all gone extinct, but apprentices of the tent maker from Tarsus are found in every corner of the world. As the Lord spoke to Joshua when they entered into the land of the Canaanites, I gave you a land on which you had not labored, and cities that you had not built, and you dwell in them. You eat the fruit of vineyards and olive orchards that you did not plant. Joshua 24:13. A system pointed towards a fundamentally unhealthy goal may need to be completely dismantled, but the same parts can often be reused to build something far better. As we continue to study the wilderness we inhabit, we should remind ourselves that not every house needs to be knocked down or stone needs to be overturned. We just need to clean out the weeds and secure a beachhead of sanity to rest and recover before putting everything in order by the clear light of a new day.